Hi everyone, my name is Renee. Yes, I come from University of Toronto at the Decolonizing School of Public Health, and I'm going to be presenting on decolonizing public health today from an Indigenous perspective in the Canadian context. So given the time, I'm going to get right into it. So I'm going to define right away what do I mean by colonization. Ultimately, you can read the slide up here, but I see it as the subjugation of one group by another. And it's ultimately the invasion and loss of territory. And how I'm going to frame my presentation around it today is I see it, colonialism and colonization, as the root of health inequities experienced by Indigenous peoples within Canada. So if I see that as the root, I want to focus on decolonization. Title of my presentation. So I'll give you a second here to read this quote, but if you turn your eyes to the last sentence, I'm going to be looking at it in a way of challenging and transforming institutional manifestations of colonialism. I see decolonization as the restoration of cultural practices, thinking, beliefs, and values in our work in public health. And ultimately, I feel as though it focuses on intergenerational teachings. You should always acknowledge the past, which will inform the present, and therefore which will impact future work. So who are Indigenous peoples in Canada, you may ask? So there is 3 defined groups in Canada by the Canadian government. However, we're much more diverse than that. The Canadian government sees us as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. However, just to give you an idea, there's 86 different languages, Indigenous languages, still spoken today within Canada. And to give you an example, so myself, I belong to 3 Indigenous nations, Métis, Algonquin, and Huron. My ancestors come from all over kind of the eastern side of Canada, as well as Scottish ancestry. So I'm going to give you an example today of what really informed my presentation around what I mean by decolonization in public health. So this comes from my master's research. I completed my master's about 2 years ago. And I was a part of an organization called the Native Youth Sexual Health Network. And just to let you know that Native and Indigenous, the 2 terms are used interchangeably within Canada. The Native Youth Sexual Health Network, also known as NISHN, is an acronym, is a by and for Indigenous youth organization working throughout the United States, Canada, and Australia across issues of sexual health and reproductive health, rights, and justice. So in my master's, we came together, and just to remind you, I was a participant of this work, and I also was on the researcher side. So I was a member of NISHN as well as completing my master's. So me and, well, they're very close to me and my friends got together with the Native Youth Sexual Health Network, and we developed a peer-led pilot intervention. This promoted Indigenous youth sexual health in a culturally safe context. So basically what we did is we came together, me and a group of Indigenous youth, and we're like, okay, HIV is an issue within our communities. What can we do together that we know will be impactful and we'll get across to our youth? So don't be fooled by the name. It was called the Sexy Health Carnival. It was a very successful project. And we actually just received 3 years of funding to bring it across Canada through CIHR, which is exciting. But the Sexy Health Carnival breaks down barriers of fear, stigma, and shame relating to issues around sexual health. And it offers accessible, safer practices content that makes health information fun. As you can see there, a lot of colors. It was very much like a carnival, booth, a lot of games, things like that. So why sexual health? You ask, why were we focusing on this? So Indigenous peoples make up 4.3% of the Canadian population. And of this, while we're such a small group, we represent 12.2% of new HIV infections within Canada and 15.9% of those currently living with HIV amongst all Canadians. And the reason I focused on Indigenous youth in particular is, at the time, I was an Indigenous youth, and we represent a large portion of the Indigenous population in Canada. We represent 18.2%. And from this, 31.6% of HIV diagnosis were youth ages 15 to 29. So it is a pretty pressing issue, and it's not going away, unfortunately. However, I just wanted to note that even though you see these statistics, to look at them and realize that this is only one side of the coin. So this quote was provided by the founder of the Native Youth Sexual Health Network, my friend Jessica Danforth. So being Indigenous or being a young person is not a risk factor by itself. In fact, being ourselves can be empowering. What actually puts our lives at risk are things like colonialism, racism, and not having access to culturally safe care. So I'm not going to get too much further into this project itself. If you're interested in learning more about actually what we did and how we went about it, this paper, I wrote a paper about it, and it was published about a month ago in the International Journal of Indigenous Health. And I'll provide a link at the very last slide if anyone is interested in accessing it. So this is what informed the points I'm going to be giving shortly, is the outcomes of this study. Even though we engaged 300 youth within this short pilot, we interviewed 154 Indigenous youth, and while we got a lot of amazing information, we got a lot of more informative things that I think can help with public health in general. So, bear with me here. So, it's about meeting youth and community where they're at. It's not about saving your participants in your work, but it's more so about creating space for youth to tell them what makes them feel empowered. And ultimately, we found out that conventional public health approaches and kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to HIV wasn't very effective for Indigenous youth in Canada. So from here, I have 3 practical applications that I thought that maybe you could start thinking about and taking away and applying to your work in public health. So I have 3 points. The first one is take a local and community approach. So what I mean by this is, first, self-location. So asking yourself, who are you? Why are you doing this work? Where are you from culturally? Where are you from geographically? Are you an ally to this work, or have you experienced similar experiences as the participants? Interpretation and dissemination. So, as I said before with the statistics, making sure you're interpreting the results and the data that you're getting from your participants, depending on how you ask the questions and frame your work, seeing it as only one little portion of the entire picture. And dissemination, this would really impact that. So how are you putting that information out there? Because as public health researchers, we pick up a paper, read the abstract, read the conclusion. How are you going to disseminate this work so we don't further stereotypes? And also, as I said before, knowing the community's history, knowing the local context's history, and this goes back to intergenerational teachings, as I stated earlier. So number 2, and also to note, these aren't in order, kind of take them as you will. Sharing decision making. So, community consultation. When you're about to go do work with your participants, are you asking them, is this what you need? Is this what you want us to do? Is there something I could add to this that would help? So consulting with the community, collaborating, partnering, and also ultimately building trust. Because sometimes you're not going to get the results that really represent this population group that you're focusing on unless they have trust to share this personal information with you. And ultimately providing a space of self-determination. Letting them self-determine how we are talking about and approaching the health of their bodies, lives, and spaces and communities. And my last point is, let's create change through action, participation, and partnerships. So, community-led. Are these communities taking leadership roles in your decision-making when it comes to this research process? Before you go make your model and start off from scratch just because this organization you work for or the university you were funded by is saying do this, are you going to the community participants you're working with to see if they want this work done or how it could be improved, like I said in the last slide? So practice and policy change. Is the work work you're doing just sitting on a shelf and collecting dust? Or are you going out there? Are you doing things about it? Are things being actually changed? Third, reciprocal dialogue. So you being here right now and being an academic or working within public health, realizing that not only can you learn from the community, I switched that around. Not only can the community learn from you and the work you put out there, but that you can learn a lot from the community that can inform your work as you move forward. And lastly, lasting relationships. So don't go in here for a short period of time. Realize that when you're working with these participants that you're talking about today, be in it for the long haul. Just don't go in there, take data you need, and then get out. So my last quote here is by Dr. Lisa Moshulin in her new book called The Colonial Problem. She's sitting right over there. If you want any more information on colonization and decolonization, it's a process and a goal. So you're not going to come out of here and be like, all right, I have the answers, this is what I'm going to do. This is an ongoing journey. It is a reimagining of relationships with the land and peoples. It is about a conscious engagement with colonial structures, ideologies, and discourses. And there's the link for my paper at the very bottom, and thank you to all the sponsors that I have listed there and the supporters. And I was wondering how much more minutes I have. 1 more minute? Okay, because there's a little something I wanted to do, and it might take 2 minutes if you're okay with that.
Go ahead.
Is I wanted to share what decolonization means to me, especially in an academic context like this. So my partner Andrew Judge over here, he's doing his PhD at the University of Western Ontario. And we had some conversations about what decolonizing meant to us, so I would like you to share, Andrew, if that's okay.
Just going to quickly share. I'll speak loud. I'm a teacher, so in the context of a Canadian Indigenous person, which I am, one of the things that we do is we share song. And I know sometimes in these contexts that doesn't always happen, but what I'd like to do now is I'd like to share a song. It's a song that came through one of our elders, and he's from Ontario. He's an Anishinaabe. Peter Ochis is his name. He died at the age of 111, and I had the opportunity to work with one of his apprentices. And so this is a song about the time we're in right now. And from my culture, I come here in a way as a messenger of the Anishinaabe people, of the Indigenous people of Canada. There's a lot, but I speak only for myself, really. And the message is about coming together, all people. And so this is a song about that message. And the song, the words are, hurry up, come with me, there's work to be done. And it's the work of the Spirit. And you can take that however you feel.
Thank you.
Come with me. There's work to be done. All the people together. Let's work of the Spirit.
Thank you very much, Penny, for your nice presentation. And I would welcome any question, any concern, any clarification that you want to know. And already wisely mentioned, Canada is a huge experience about Aboriginal various part, and I'm thrilled that she brings a lot of partner, York University, OHTM, and you can see CIHR. Many people also don't know what is CIHR. So when you go outside, then sometimes you should explain Canadian Institute of Health Research, then they will easily understand. So many people don't know what is OHTM. they are very keen about the HIV research, especially those who are Aboriginal area focus. As you know, as a new Canadian, my first experience to work with OHTM. As a senior scientist, I exactly know what you are talking about. And I have an Indigenous paper also, you can see. Anyway, any questions from your side?
If anyone's interested in this type of work,
and you're welcome to contact.
Raglan Maddox will be speaking at what time, Raglan? 3:45 in room 2, if you're interested in hearing more about this.
Good. Thank you.